I sat there 28 years old, the only mourner from a funeral that had ended an hour ago, holding an envelope with my name written in shaky handwriting across the front. Mr. Pemberton the lawyer. Not the deceased watched me with curious eyes, as if he knew something I didn't. As if he'd been waiting years for this exact moment. "Miss Cooper," he said gently. "Thomas wanted you to have this. He was very specific about the timing. Thomas Whitmore. The old man next door. The monster of my childhood. The villain in 1,000 family stories." My hands trembled as I turned the envelope over. I wasn't sure I wanted to open it. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when I was just a girl who believed everything her parents told her. I grew up in a quiet suburb of Portland, in a butter yellow house with blue shutters that my mother repainted every 3 years like clockwork. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where block parties happened every 4th of July, and where secrets were supposedly impossible to keep. Except for Thomas Whitmore. He lived in the house directly adjacent to ours. A modest gray craftsman with a wraparound porch and a garden that exploded with roses every spring. I remember those roses, deep crimson, soft pink, brilliant white, cascading over his fence like they were trying to escape into our yard. My mother hated those roses. "They attract bees," she'd say, her voice tight with an anger that seemed too large for the crime. "Dangerous, aggressive bees." I was 7 when my parents built the fence. Not just any fence, a towering 10-foot monstrosity of dark wood that blocked out the sun and made our backyard feel like a prison yard. I watched from my bedroom window as the construction crew sank post after post into the ground, creating a wall between us and Thomas. Why are we building it so high? I asked my father that evening. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between fear and fury. "To keep you safe, Lily. That man ... He's not right. He's dangerous." That word, dangerous, became the cornerstone of my understanding of Thomas Whitmore. My parents wielded it like a weapon, dropping it into conversations whenever his name arose, which was more often than you might think for someone we were supposedly avoiding. "Stay away from the fence," my mother would warn. "Thomas Whitmore is a dangerous man. Don't let your ball go into his yard," my father would add. "We don't go over there, ever. But children are curious creatures, and I was no exception." I'd peek through the knotholes in the fence, catching glimpses of Thomas tending his roses, sitting on his porch with a book, feeding the stray cat that had claimed his front steps as home. He looked ... ordinary. An old man with white hair and stooped shoulders, wearing cardigans even in summer, moving slowly through his daily routines. Where was the danger my parents spoke of? The first lawsuit happened when I was 9. I didn't understand the details. Legal documents and property lines and municipal codes were beyond my comprehension. But I understood the tension that invaded our house like smoke. My mother's jaw was perpetually clenched. My father spent hours on the phone with lawyers, his voice rising and falling in frustrated waves. "He's doing it deliberately," my mother said one night, thinking I was asleep. I sat at the top of the stairs, listening through the banister rails. "That tree. He knows it's dropping leaves into our pool. He knows it's going to damage our property value. The judge will see reason," my father replied, though he didn't sound convinced. They lost that case. The tree, a magnificent oak that had probably stood for a century, was on Thomas's property, and he had every right to keep it. My parents were ordered to pay court costs. The rage in our house was palpable for weeks. I started school at Riverside Elementary that year, and I learned that Thomas Whitmore's reputation extended beyond our property line. "Your neighbor is that weird old man?" Jessica Huang asked during recess, her eyes wide. "My dad says he's creepy," added Michael Torres. "Says he just sits on his porch and watches people. My mom crosses the street when she sees him," contributed Emma Wells. I absorbed these comments like a sponge, each one adding another layer to the narrative I'd been fed since birth. Thomas Whitmore wasn't just dangerous. He was creepy, weird, wrong somehow. The entire neighborhood seemed to agree. But here's what I noticed. Even as a child, no one could tell me what he'd actually done. He just ... watches, they'd say vaguely. "There's something off about him," they'd insist. "You can just tell," they'd conclude, as if intuition were evidence. The second lawsuit came when I was 12. This time it was about noise. Thomas had apparently been playing classical music, I later learned, though my parents made it sound like death metal at midnight. They claimed it disturbed their peace, disrupted their sleep, violated noise ordinances. I remember the night before the court date. My mother was practicing her testimony in the living room, my father feeding her questions like a courtroom drama. "And how has this affected your quality of life, Mrs. Cooper?" "We can't sleep. We can't relax in our own home. We feel under siege." Under siege. By Mozart. They lost that case too. The judge found that Thomas' music playing between the hours of 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. was well within reasonable limits and protected by his rights as a homeowner. My parents came home in stony silence. They didn't speak for 3 days. As I entered my teenage years, my relationship with the story of Thomas Whitmore grew more complicated. I was old enough now to sense the obsession in my parents' fixation. Normal people who disliked their neighbors simply avoided them. They didn't spend thousands on legal fees. They didn't dedicate hours to documenting perceived infractions. They didn't turn every family dinner into a strategy session about the Thomas problem. "Mom, I ventured one evening when I was 15. What did he actually do? I mean, before all the lawsuits and stuff. What started all this?" My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father's face darkened. "Lillian Margaret Cooper," my mother said, using my full name like a weapon. "That man is dangerous. That's all you need to know. But, no buts. This discussion is over." And it was. They wouldn't talk about it. Not then, not ever. Whatever Thomas had done, or whatever they believed he'd done, remained locked behind a wall of parental authority and unquestionable judgment. The third lawsuit arrived during my senior year of high school. This one was the most desperate, the most grasping. They sued Thomas for the deteriorating fence, the fence they had built, claiming that he had somehow damaged it by malicious neglect of the vegetation on his side of the property line. Even I could see how ridiculous it was. The judge certainly did. He dismissed the case within 15 minutes, his irritation clear even in the dry legal language of the official dismissal. He warned my parents against further frivolous litigation and suggested they might benefit from mediation services. My parents were humiliated. Our family became a joke on the neighborhood Facebook group posts about those people who keep suing the poor old man, and when being a bad neighbor becomes a hobby, we stopped going to block parties. My mother quit the garden club. My father resigned from the Homeowners Association board. We became isolated, circled wagons, us against the world. And somehow, it was all Thomas Whitmore's fault. I left for college the following fall, escaping to Seattle with a mixture of relief and guilt. The University of Washington felt like another planet, a place where no one knew about the fence feud, where I could be just Lily, not the daughter of those crazy people who hate their neighbor. I studied psychology. Perhaps inevitably. I wanted to understand people, understand why they did the things they did, believe the things they believed. I wanted to understand my parents. During my sophomore year, in an abnormal psychology class, we studied a phenomenon called delusional disorder, a condition where someone holds firmly to a false belief despite clear evidence to the contrary. The belief is usually non-bizarre, something that could theoretically happen, which makes it harder to challenge. I thought about my parents, about their unshakable conviction that Thomas Whitmore was dangerous, about how no evidence seemed to sway them, how every lost court case only reinforced their belief that the system was protecting him, that everyone else was blind to the threat they alone could see. Was it possible my parents were ill, mentally ill? The thought terrified me. Because if they were wrong about Thomas, if they'd spent decades tormenting an innocent man, then what did that say about everything else they'd taught me? What other beliefs had I absorbed that might be based on delusion rather than reality? I came home less and less. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and regret. I sat there, 28 years old, the only mourner from a funeral that had ended an hour ago, holding an envelope with my name written in shaky handwriting across the front. Mr. Pemberton, the lawyer. Not the deceased, watched me with curious eyes, as if he knew something I didn't, as if he'd been waiting years for this exact moment. "Miss Cooper," he said gently, "Thomas wanted you to have this." He was very specific about the timing. Thomas Whitmore, the old man next door. The monster of my childhood. The villain in 1,000 family stories. My hands trembled as I turned the envelope over. I wasn't sure I wanted to open it. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when I was just a girl who believed everything her parents told her. I grew up in a quiet suburb of Portland, in a butter yellow house with blue shutters that my mother repainted every 3 years like clockwork. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where block parties happened every 4th of July, and where secrets were supposedly impossible to keep. Except for Thomas Whitmore. He lived in the house directly adjacent to ours, a modest gray craftsman with a wraparound porch and a garden that exploded with roses every spring. I remember those roses, deep crimson, soft pink, brilliant white, cascading over his fence like they were trying to escape into our yard. My mother hated those roses. "They attract bees," she'd say, her voice tight with an anger that seemed too large for the crime. Dangerous, aggressive bees. I was 7 when my parents built the fence. Not just any fence, a towering 10-foot monstrosity of dark wood that blocked out the sun and made our backyard feel like a prison yard. I watched from my bedroom window as the construction crew sank post after post into the ground, creating a wall between us and Thomas. Why are we building it so high? I asked my father that evening. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between fear and fury. "To keep you safe, Lily. That man ... he's not right. He's dangerous." That word, dangerous, became the cornerstone of my understanding of Thomas Whitmore. My parents wielded it like a weapon, dropping it into conversations whenever his name arose, which was more often than you might think for someone we were supposedly avoiding. "Stay away from the fence," my mother would warn. "Thomas Whitmore is a dangerous man. Don't let your ball go into his yard," my father would add. "We don't go over there. Ever. But children are curious creatures, and I was no exception. I'd peek through the knotholes in the fence, catching glimpses of Thomas tending his roses, sitting on his porch with a book, feeding the stray cat that had claimed his front steps as home. He looked ... ordinary, an old man with white hair and stooped shoulders, wearing cardigans even in summer, moving slowly through his daily routines. Where was the danger my parents spoke of? The first lawsuit happened when I was 9. I didn't understand the details, legal documents and property lines and municipal codes were beyond my comprehension, but I understood the tension that invaded our house like smoke. My mother's jaw was perpetually clenched. My father spent hours on the phone with lawyers, his voice rising and falling in frustrated waves. "He's doing it deliberately," my mother said one night, thinking I was asleep. I sat at the top of the stairs, listening through the banister rails. "That tree. He knows it's dropping leaves into our pool. He knows it's going to damage our property value. The judge will see reason," my father replied, though he didn't sound convinced. They lost that case. The tree, a magnificent oak that had probably stood for a century, was on Thomas's property, and he had every right to keep it. My parents were ordered to pay court costs. The rage in our house was palpable for weeks. I started school at Riverside Elementary that year, and I learned that Thomas Whitmore's reputation extended beyond our property line. "Your neighbor is that weird old man?" Jessica Huang asked during recess, her eyes wide. "My dad says he's creepy," added Michael Torres. "Says he just sits on his porch and watches people. My mom crosses the street when she sees him," contributed Emma Wells. I absorbed these comments like a sponge, each one adding another layer to the narrative I'd been fed since birth. Thomas Whitmore wasn't just dangerous, he was creepy, weird, wrong somehow. The entire neighborhood seemed to agree. But here's what I noticed. Even as a child, no one could tell me what he'd actually done. "He just ... watches," they'd say vaguely. "There's something off about him," they'd insist. "You can just tell," they'd conclude, as if intuition were evidence. The second lawsuit came when I was 12. This time it was about noise. Thomas had apparently been playing classical music, I later learned, though my parents made it sound like death metal at midnight. They claimed it disturbed their peace, disrupted their sleep, violated noise ordinances. I remember the night before the court date. My mother was practicing her testimony in the living room, my father feeding her questions like a courtroom drama. "And how has this affected your quality of life, Mrs. Cooper? We can't sleep. We can't relax in our own home. We feel under siege."
Under Siege by Mozart, they lost that case too. The judge found that Thomas' music playing between the hours of 10 a.m. and 8 p.m. was well within reasonable limits and protected by his rights as a homeowner. My parents came home in stony silence. They didn't speak for 3 days. As I entered my teenage years, my relationship with the story of Thomas Whitmore grew more complicated. I was old enough now to sense the obsession in my parents' fixation. Normal people who disliked their neighbors simply avoided them. They didn't spend thousands on legal fees. They didn't dedicate hours to documenting perceived infractions. They didn't turn every family dinner into a strategy session about the Thomas problem. Mom, I ventured one evening when I was 15. What did he actually do? I mean, before all the lawsuits and stuff, what started all this? My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father's face darkened. Lillian Margaret Cooper, my mother said, using my full name like a weapon. That man is dangerous. That's all you need to know. But, no buts. This discussion is over.
And it was. They wouldn't talk about it.
Not then, not ever. Whatever Thomas had done, or whatever they believed he'd done, remained locked behind a wall of parental authority and unquestionable judgment. The third lawsuit arrived during my senior year of high school. This one was the most desperate, the most grasping. They sued Thomas for the deteriorating fence, the fence they had built, claiming that he had somehow damaged it by malicious neglect of the vegetation on his side of the property line. Even I could see how ridiculous it was. The judge certainly did. He dismissed the case within 15 minutes, his irritation clear even in the dry legal language of the official dismissal. He warned my parents against further frivolous litigation and suggested they might benefit from mediation services. My parents were humiliated. Our family became a joke on the neighborhood Facebook group posts about those people who keep suing the poor old man, and when being a bad neighbor becomes a hobby, we stopped going to block parties. My mother quit the garden club. My father resigned from the Homeowners Association board. We became isolated, circled wagons, us against the world, and somehow it was all Thomas Whitmore's fault. I left for college the following fall, escaping to Seattle with a mixture of relief and guilt. The University of Washington felt like another planet, a place where no one knew about the fence feud, where I could be just Lily, not the daughter of those crazy people who hate their neighbor. I studied psychology, perhaps inevitably. I wanted to understand people, understand why they did the things they did, believe the things they believed. I wanted to understand my parents. During my sophomore year, in an abnormal psychology class, we studied a phenomenon called delusional disorder. A condition where someone holds firmly to a false belief despite clear evidence to the contrary. The belief is usually non-bizarre, something that could theoretically happen, which makes it harder to challenge. I thought about my parents. About their unshakable conviction that Thomas Whitmore was dangerous. About how no evidence seemed to sway them, how every lost court case only reinforced their belief that the system was protecting him, that everyone else was blind to the threat they alone could see. Was it possible my parents were ill? Mentally ill? The thought terrified me. Because if they were wrong about Thomas, if they'd spent decades tormenting an innocent man, then what did that say about everything else they'd taught me? What other beliefs had I absorbed that might be based on delusion rather than reality? I came home less and less. Thanksgiving, Christmas, maybe a weekend in summer. Each visit felt more strained, more performative. I was playing the role of dutiful daughter while my mind screamed questions I couldn't ask. My mother's hair had gone gray. My father had developed a tremor in his left hand. They looked older than their years, worn down by decades of anger and litigation and neighborhood ostracization. And through the fence, that damned fence, I could sometimes hear Thomas, the scrape of his garden tools, the classical music drifting through the air, the soft voice he used when talking to the cat. He sounded so normal. After graduation, I stayed in Seattle, building a life and career as a therapist specializing in family systems. I helped other people untangle their dysfunctional relationships, identify toxic patterns, set healthy boundaries. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents called every Sunday like clockwork. The conversations followed a predictable pattern. Small talk about weather and health, my mother's reports on neighborhood gossip, and inevitably, updates about Thomas. His garden is overgrown, she'd report with satisfaction.
He must be getting too old to maintain it. I heard him fall last week, she'd say another time. He didn't call for help.
Pride, probably. Or maybe he has no one to call. There was something gleeful in her observations of his decline.
It made my skin crawl. The call came on a Tuesday in March. I was between clients, eating a sad desk salad, when my phone rang. "Mom." "Lily," she said, and her voice had a strange quality, something between triumph and uncertainty. "Thomas Whitmore died."
I set down my fork.
"Oh, they found him yesterday morning." Mrs. Chun saw the newspapers piling up and called for a wellness check. He'd been dead for 3 days. 3 days, alone, undiscovered. "That's sad," I managed. My mother responded, a sound that was carefully neutral. "I suppose. Anyway, I thought you should know. In case you—"
I don't know. Wondered? Why would I wonder? I'd never even met the man.
He was just the boogeyman of my childhood, the shadow villain who'd never actually done anything to me.
And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about him.
An obituary appeared in the Portland Register 3 days later.
I found it online, a brief paragraph that felt too small for a human life. Thomas Edward Whitmore,
87, passed away peacefully in his home on March 15th. Born in Portland to Edward and Marion Whitmore, Thomas was a lifelong resident of the city. He worked as a music teacher for Portland Public Schools for 42 years before retirement. He was preceded in death by his wife, Catherine, and his daughter, Rebecca. No services planned. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Portland Youth Music Program, a music teacher, for 42 years.
He'd had a wife, a daughter, both gone.
I stared at the screen, something cold settling in my chest. This man, this supposedly dangerous man, had spent his career teaching children.
Wouldn't that have been the first sign of danger? Wouldn't there have been complaints, warnings, incidents? I did what I probably shouldn't have done. I Googled him.
Thomas Edward Whitmore, Portland music teacher. Search. The results were sparse but revealing. A few mentions in school newsletters from the 1970s and 80s, a photo from a 1992 recital showing a younger Thomas, still old by my standards, but vibrant, smiling, surrounded by students holding violins and flutes. A brief article from 2004 about his retirement celebration, where former students gathered to honor his 4 decades of service. "Mr. Whitmore changed my life," one quote read.
"He saw something in me I didn't see in myself.
He's the reason I pursued music professionally. Nothing sinister, nothing dangerous. Just an ordinary man who taught music and tended roses and lived quietly next door." The funeral was scheduled for Saturday morning at Riverside Memorial Chapel.
I didn't plan to go. What would be the point?
I didn't know him. He was my parents' enemy, not mine. My presence would be weird, maybe even insulting to whatever distant relatives might appear. But Saturday morning came, and I found myself in my car, driving the 3 hours from Seattle to Portland. I told myself I was being professional, a therapist studying family dynamics, observing the conclusion of a decades-long conflict. I told myself I was being compassionate, ensuring the old man had at least one person acknowledge his passing. The truth was simpler. I needed to see. I needed to know who Thomas Whitmore really was, beyond the story I'd been told. Riverside Memorial Chapel was a small building tucked between a florist and a law office. The parking lot was empty except for a single black sedan. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, working up courage before finally walking through the front doors. The viewing room was heartbreaking in its emptiness. 6 rows of chairs facing a simple casket, all unoccupied. A small table held a guest book with no signatures. A single flower arrangement, white lily, ironically sat beside the casket. And there, standing near the front, was an elderly man in an expensive suit, a leather folder tucked under his arm. He turned when he heard my footsteps, surprise crossing his face. "Hello," he said gently. "Are you here for Thomas?" I nodded, suddenly unable to speak. "I'm Harold Pemberton." He introduced himself, extending a hand. I was Thomas's attorney. And his friend, I suppose, though he didn't have many of those left. We shook hands. His grip was warm, steady. There's no service planned, he continued. Thomas was specific about that. He said if anyone came, and he doubted anyone would, they should have a few minutes to say goodbye, and that would be enough. I'm Lily Cooper, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I lived next door. Something flickered in Harold Pemberton's eyes. Recognition, understanding, maybe pity. Ah, he said simply. I see. We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. Would you like a few minutes alone? I nodded, grateful. He moved to the back of the room, giving me space. I approached the casket slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. Thomas looked peaceful. Death had smoothed the lines from his face, made him look younger somehow. His hands were folded across his chest, weathered hands that had taught thousands of children to hold instruments, to read music, to find beauty in sound. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry. For what, exactly? For my parents' treatment of him? For never questioning their narrative? For not being brave enough to introduce myself during all those years, to simply knock on his door and say hello? For letting him die alone, unremembered, unmourned? Tears spilled down my cheeks. I was crying for a stranger, for a man I'd never spoken to, for all the years of wasted animosity and the loneliness he must have felt, living beside a family that hated him for reasons he probably never understood. Harold Pemberton's voice came softly from behind me. He knew, you know. About your parents. I turned to face him, wiping my eyes. He never spoke ill of them, Harold continued. Not once in all the years I knew him. He'd just say, they have their reasons, and leave it at that. What reasons? The question burst out of me. What did he do? Why did they hate him so much? Harold studied me for a long moment. Then he opened his leather folder and withdrew an envelope. Thomas asked me to give you this, he said. After. He was very specific, it had to be after the funeral, and only if you came. He said if you didn't come, I should destroy it unread. My name was written across the front in shaky handwriting, Miss Lillian Cooper. My hands trembled as I took it. Should I gestured vaguely. Should I read it now? That's up to you, Harold said. But perhaps you'd like to step into my office? It's just next door. More private. More comfortable. I looked back at the casket, at Thomas's peaceful face, and nodded. Harold Pemberton's office was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town attorney who'd practiced for 40 years. Walls lined with law books, a heavy wooden desk scarred with decades of use, leather chairs that creaked when you sat in them. It smelled like old paper and coffee. He gestured to a chair and settled behind his desk. I sat, the envelope burning in my hands. I should tell you, Harold said, that Thomas revised his will 4 times in the last year. Each revision was specifically focused on you. What to leave you, when to give it to you, what I should and shouldn't say. Leave me? My voice cracked. He's leaving me something? Open the letter, Harold said gently. It will explain better than I can. My fingers fumbled with the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, filled with that same shaky handwriting. I began to read. Dear Lillian, if you're reading this, it means you came. I hoped you would, though I wouldn't have blamed you if you hadn't. I've been the villain in your family's story for so long. It would be natural for you to see me that way too. But you were always different. Even as a little girl, I'd catch you watching through the fence with curious eyes, not frightened ones. You looked at me like I was a puzzle you wanted to solve, not a monster to fear. There are things you need to know. Things your parents never told you, because they either don't remember or have convinced themselves of a different version of events. Memory is funny that way. We rewrite our own histories to make ourselves the heroes. I'm going to tell you the truth. Not my version, not their version, but what actually happened. It started 40 years ago. My hands shook as I continued reading. I moved into the house next to yours in 1985. Your parents had been there for 2 years already. You weren't born yet. Your mother was pregnant with you, though I didn't know that initially. They seemed like nice people. Young couple, working hard, building a life. Your father was an accountant, your mother a nurse. We'd wave hello, exchange pleasantries about the weather. Normal neighbor things. Catherine, my wife, she'd bring over cookies sometimes.
Your mother would reciprocate with a casserole. Men being men, your father and I would talk about lawn care and the trailblazers. Catherine and I had been through hell by then, you see. Our daughter Rebecca, she died 3 years earlier.
Hit by a drunk driver at 19. She was coming home from college for Thanksgiving. We moved to that house to escape the memories. New neighborhood, fresh start. The grief was still crushing, but we were learning to carry it.
Your mother gave birth to you in February 1986. We were so happy for them. For a while, seeing you helped Catherine. She'd watch from the window sometimes, see your father carrying you in your car seat, your mother pushing your stroller. It hurt, but it was a sweet hurt.
A reminder that life goes on, that beauty persists. I paused, wiping tears from my eyes. Harold sat quietly, giving me space to process. Then came that August afternoon. It was hot Portland hot, which means everyone's miserable, and the city smells like warm garbage.
Catherine and I were in our backyard. I was reading. She was working on her roses, which were just getting established. We heard the sliding door from your house. Your mother coming out with you, you were about 6 months old.
She had one of those baby bouncer things, set it up in the shade.
Catherine and I smiled at each other. You were a beautiful baby, Lillian.
Big eyes, lots of dark hair. You made these sweet cooing sounds.
Your mother went back inside.
I remember thinking she'd just stepped in for a moment, maybe to get water.
Or the diaper bag or something she'd forgotten. But minutes passed, 5, then 10, and you started crying. Just fussy at first, then escalating. Catherine looked worried. Should we check? She asked.
Give it another minute, I said. She probably heard her and is coming. But no one came. Your crying intensified. You were red-faced, clearly distressed. It was so hot, and you were in full sun now. The shade had shifted. Thomas, Catherine said, standing up. Something's wrong. She was right. We could see into your yard from our back porch. Could see you alone, screaming, no one coming.
I went to your back door, knocked, then knocked louder.
No answer. Your screams were piercing now. The kind that trigger every protective instinct.
I'm going over,
Catherine said.
Wait.
But she was already moving, opening the gate between our yards. There was no fence then, just a small gate in a low border fence, rushing to you. I looked up at Harold, my heart pounding.
My mother was asleep, I whispered. Wasn't she?
Keep reading, he said gently. Catherine picked you up, checked you over. You were overheated, dehydrated, diaper soaked through. She was a mother, she knew what to do. She took you inside your house through the sliding door.
And found your mother unconscious on the couch, empty wine bottle on the coffee table.
Pills scattered nearby. Whether it was accidental or intentional, we never knew. Your mother has always insisted she just nodded off, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Catherine called 911 while I stayed with you, giving you water from a bottle we found, trying to cool you down, change your diaper. The paramedics came. Police came.
Your father came home from work to find emergency vehicles in his driveway. Your mother was rushed to the hospital.
You were examined, mild dehydration, heat stress, but okay. You'd survive. Because Catherine had intervened. Your father was grateful that day. Shaken, scared, but grateful. Thank you, he said, holding you tight. Thank God you were home.
Thank God you heard her. We thought that was the end of it. A scare, a close call, a reminder to be vigilant. But something changed in the weeks that followed. I had to stop reading.
My vision was blurring, my breath coming in short gasps. No, I whispered. No, that can't be right. There are medical records, Harold said quietly. Police reports, all documentation Thomas kept, just in case. It's all true, Lily. Your mother came home from the hospital after 3 days. We saw her through the windows, moving slowly, looking fragile.
I thought maybe I should check in, see if she needed anything. But Catherine stopped me. Give them space, she said. She's probably embarrassed. She was right to stop me.
Because whatever gratitude your parents felt initially began to curdle into something else.
Shame, I think, Humiliation. They'd nearly lost you. The neighbors had saved you. There were questions from doctors, from police, from Child Protective Services.
People knew. People talked.
And rather than deal with that shame, rather than face what had happened, your parents began to rewrite the narrative.
It started small. Your mother stopped acknowledging us. She'd turn away when we waved, hurry inside when we came out. Then the story started. We'd hear from other neighbors. Did you hear what the Coopers are saying?
That you were watching their baby through the fence? That it made them uncomfortable?
They're saying you came into their house uninvited. They're saying Catherine had no right to touch their baby. Each version got worse.
By the time you were a toddler, we'd become the aggressors in their story, the nosy neighbors. The creepy old people who'd violated their privacy, their parental rights, their home. The truth that we'd saved your life got buried under layers of revision and denial. I couldn't breathe.
The room was spinning. Harold pushed a box of tissues across the desk. I grabbed a handful, pressing them to my face.
My whole childhood,
I choked out. Everything they told me.
The fence, the lawsuits, all of it.
Was them creating distance from their own guilt and shame? Harold finished. Thomas understood that. He was trained as a teacher, but he'd studied psychology too. He recognized what was happening, even if it hurt him. Why didn't he fight back? I demanded. Why didn't he tell people the truth? He did at first. But who were people going to believe? A couple with a baby, or the old man next door telling an uncomfortable story about their parenting?
Your parents were young, presentable, part of the community.
Thomas and Catherine were elderly, childless or childless by appearance.
They didn't tell many people about Rebecca. I looked back at the letter, forcing myself to continue. Catherine died in 1994, heart attack.
She was 68. The last years of her life were colored by your parents' campaign against us.
Every time we won a court case, every time a judge ruled in our favor, I'd see the relief in her eyes. Someone believed us. Someone saw the truth. But it also wore on her.
The constant hostility, the whispers, the way your parents poisoned the neighborhood against us. It's exhausting to be the villain in someone else's story, especially when you know the real story.
After she died, I thought about moving. Selling the house, starting over somewhere new. But this was my home.
Rebecca grew up here in the old house before I moved to this one. Catherine's roses were here, her spirit.
I wasn't going to let your parents drive me out of my own life. So I stayed. I tended the garden. I played my music. I fed the stray cat. I lived quietly, bothering no one, enduring the fence and the lawsuits and the glares, and I watched you grow up. My chest ached.
I could barely see through my tears. You were a beautiful child, Lillian. Smart, curious, kind. I'd see you in the backyard, playing, reading, later staring at the fence with questions in your eyes. I wanted to talk to you. God, how I wanted to tell you the truth to explain. But what could I say? What could I do that wouldn't make things worse?
So I just watched like your parents claimed I always did. But I wasn't watching out of creepiness or danger. I was watching with regret and affection and the ghost of hope. Hope that maybe someday you'd ask the right questions.
That you'd dig beneath the story you'd been told. Hope that maybe, in some small way, you'd understand. You became a therapist.
Did you know I knew that?
The internet makes it easy to follow people from a distance.
I was so proud.
You chose a profession about understanding, about healing, about truth. That's when I started planning. If you became someone who sought truth professionally, maybe you'd be ready to hear it personally. This letter is that truth. The documentation Harold has will back it up: medical records, police reports, court transcripts. It's all there. But more than that, I'm leaving you something else. I looked up sharply at Harold.
What else?
He opened a drawer and withdrew a key, setting it on the desk between us. The house, he said simply. Thomas left you his house. What? No. I can't, that doesn't make. Keep reading, Harold said. I'm leaving you my house, Lillian. The house your parents tried so hard to destroy, to separate from, to erase. But more importantly, I'm leaving you what's inside. In the attic, you'll find boxes, photos, journals, letters. My life with Catherine, our life with Rebecca. Evidence of the people we were before we became villains in your family's mythology. And you'll find something else. Something I've kept for 40 years, waiting for the right moment, the right person. You'll find Rebecca's music room. After she died, I couldn't bear to dismantle it. Her violin, her sheet music, her awards, her dreams. Catherine and I moved it to the new house, recreated exactly, kept it like a shrine. It's yours now, because I think you need to see it.
To understand that I wasn't a monster. I was a father who lost his daughter, a husband who lost his wife, a man who made one choice to save a baby's life and paid for it every day since.
Use the house however you want. Sell it, rent it, live in it.
But first, spend some time there. Walk through the rooms. Sit in the garden. Listen to the silence. And maybe, just maybe, forgive your parents. Not because they deserve it, but because carrying their guilt and shame and lies will poison you the same way it poisoned them.
You deserve better than that, Lillian.
You always did. With affection and hope, Thomas Edward Whitmore, I sat in silence for a long moment, the letter trembling in my hands.
There's one more thing, Harold said gently. He pulled out another document, official, legal, notarized. Thomas also left a provision that you can contest if you wish.
He's left instructions and funding for the fence to be removed.
The 10-foot monstrosity, as he called it. He wants me to tear it down. He wants to give you the choice. It's your property now, on both sides of the property line. You can keep it up if you want that boundary. Or you can tear it down and let the sun back in. I looked at the key on the desk.
Such a small object to represent so much weight.
When can I see it? I whispered.
The house?
Whenever you're ready, Harold said.
But Lily,
he paused, choosing his words carefully.
You should prepare yourself.
Your parents are next door. This is going to destroy them, I finished.
Finding out I inherited the house of the man they spent 40 years tormenting. Harold nodded slowly. It might be the crisis that forces truth, or it might drive the divide deeper.
I can't predict how they'll react. I stood up, my legs shaky but determined. I picked up the key, feeling its weight in my palm. I need to see it, I said.
Now, today.
Before I lose my nerve.
Harold stood as well.
Would you like me to come with you?
For moral support?
I considered it, then shook my head.
No, this is something I need to do alone. We walked back to the funeral home so I could say a final goodbye. The room was still empty, still heartbreakingly quiet.
I approached the casket one more time, looking down at Thomas's peaceful face.
Thank you,
I whispered.
Thank you for saving me.
Thank you for the truth.
Thank you for trusting that I'd be brave enough to hear it.
I placed my hand on his folded ones, cold but somehow comforting.
I'll take care of your house, I promised.
And your roses, and Rebecca's room.
I'll make sure your story, the true story's finally told. Harold walked me to my car. The afternoon sun was bright, almost aggressively cheerful.
The address is on the key, he said.
Though I suppose you know it by heart. I laughed, a sound edged with hysteria.
40 years of staring at it through a fence. Yes, I know the address. Call me if you need anything, Harold said. Thomas was very specific about making sure you had support through this process. We shook hands again, and I got into my car. My hands trembled as I started the engine. The drive to my childhood neighborhood took 12 minutes. 12 minutes to travel 40 years. 12 minutes to approach the epicenter of my family's mythology. I drove slowly down Maple Street, passing houses I'd known my entire life. Mrs. Chun's blue Victorian. The Torres family's modern ranch. Emma Wells's childhood home, now painted a different color.
And there, at the end of the block, 2 houses standing side by side. My parents' butter yellow house with blue shutters, meticulously maintained, garden perfect.
And Thomas's gray craftsman, garden slightly overgrown, roses cascading everywhere, untamed without his careful hands to guide them.
The fence between them. That massive, ugly fence, dark and looming, blocking out light, blocking out truth.
I parked on the street, my heart hammering. And then I saw movement.
My mother, coming out onto her porch, watering can in hand.
She hadn't seen my car yet, hadn't noticed me.
I watched her for a moment, this woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me right from wrong, who'd built her entire identity around being the victim of a dangerous neighbor. She looked smaller than I remembered, older, tired, and I thought about Thomas's words. Maybe, just maybe, forgive your parents, but not yet.
First, I needed to see. I needed to know the full truth. I got out of my car. Her face went through a rapid series of expressions, surprise, confusion, then hardening into something defensive. She set down the watering can and crossed her arms, standing on her porch like a sentinel guarding her territory. Lily, what are you doing here? You didn't say you were coming to visit. I held up the key, sunlight glinting off its brass surface. I'm not visiting you, Mom. I'm visiting my house. The silence that followed was profound. I watched the words register, watched her try to make sense of what I'd said.
Your house? What are you talking about?
Thomas Whitmore's house, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He left it to me. I'm the new owner.
My mother's face went pale, then flushed red. That's not possible. You didn't even know him.
Why would he?
Because I was the only one who came to his funeral.
I interrupted. The only person in 40 years of living next door who showed him a moment of human decency. Decency? My mother's voice rose, sharp with indignation. That man was dangerous, I know. You've said it 1,000 times. But you've never said why. You've never explained what he actually did. My father appeared in the doorway behind her, his face immediately wary. Lily, what's going on? Thomas Whitmore left her his house, my mother said, her voice brittle. Can you believe that?
After everything he did to us, he leaves his house to our daughter. What did he do to you?
I asked, looking directly at my father.
Tell me right now, what did Thomas Whitmore do that justified 40 years of hatred?
My parents exchanged glances, a whole conversation in a look. Lily, honey, this isn't the time or place. My father started. Yes, it is. It's exactly the time and place. I took a step closer to their porch, still holding the key like a talisman.
I just came from his funeral, from his lawyer's office.
I know the truth, Dad. I know what really happened. My mother's face went rigid.
I don't know what lies he told you. He didn't tell me lies. He told me the truth.
He told me about August 1986. About the day I was 6 months old and you left me outside alone. About how you were found unconscious with an empty wine bottle and pills scattered around you. About how Thomas and Catherine saved my life.
The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion.
My father sat down heavily on the porch step.
My mother's arms dropped to her sides, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. That's not ... double quotes, she began, then stopped.
It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I demanded. Because Thomas kept all the documentation. Police reports, medical records, CPS evaluations.
It's all there, Mom. The truth you've been running from for 40 years. My mother's voice, when it came, was barely audible. I was sick. Postpartum depression, they called it later.
I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight.
The doctor had given me pills, and I just...
I just wanted to rest. I didn't mean to take too many.
I didn't mean to fall asleep outside. And instead of getting help, I said,
more gently now, instead of being grateful to the neighbors who saved your daughter's life, you rewrote the entire story. You made them the villains so you didn't have to be one. My father's voice was hoarse. You don't understand what it was like. The shame. The way people looked at us. CPS came to our house, Lily. They interviewed us, investigated us. We almost lost you. Because of your choices, I said. Not because of Thomas and Catherine. They were the heroes of that story, and you've spent my entire life painting them as monsters. We protected you, my mother said desperately. We built that fence to keep you safe, to make sure nothing like that ever happened again. You built that fence to keep the truth out, I corrected. To create a physical barrier between you and the people who knew what really happened.
And you convinced yourselves and me that they were the danger when really you were protecting yourselves from your own shame.
Tears were streaming down my mother's face now. ICOULDA and single quotes T dot dot. I couldn't face them every day, knowing they knew. Knowing they'd seen me at my worst. Every time Catherine would look at me, I'd remember. Every time Thomas was in his yard, I'd feel it all over again. The failure, the fear, the knowledge that I'd almost killed my own child. So you killed them instead, I said quietly. Not literally, but you killed their peace, their reputation, their ability to live quietly in their home. Catherine died while you were suing them for the second time. Did you know that? Thomas spent the last years of his life completely alone because you'd poisoned the entire neighborhood against him. My father looked up at me, his eyes red. We didn't know. About Catherine. He never said. Why would he? You weren't exactly friendly. Lily, we're sorry, my father said, his voice breaking. We're so sorry, but we can't change it now. Thomas is gone. What's done is done. No, I said firmly. What's done is going to be revealed. I'm going to tell people the truth. The real story. Thomas deserves that much. My mother's face hardened again. Fear turning to defensiveness. You can't. People will think they'll judge us. Yes, I agreed. They will. The same way you judged Thomas for 40 years. The same way you taught me to judge him. I turned away from them, toward Thomas's house. I'm going inside now. I'm going to spend time in the home of the man who saved my life. I'm going to learn about him, about Catherine, about their daughter Rebecca. I'm going to understand who they really were. Lily, please, my mother called out. I looked back at her. You can choose shame again. You can hide, lie, defend your version of events. Or you can choose honesty. You can face what you did, apologize to a dead man's memory, and try to become people who deserve forgiveness. How? My father asked desperately. How do we do that? I don't know yet, I admitted. But you'd better figure it out, because I'm not going to keep your secret anymore. I'm done being part of the lie. I walked up Thomas's front path, roses brushing against my legs, releasing their scent into the air. The key turned smoothly in the lock, as if it had been waiting for me. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, shutting out my parents' stricken faces, shutting out 40 years of false narrative. The house was quiet. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through lace curtains. The air smelled like old books and furniture polish and something else, maybe roses, maybe just memory. I stood in the foyer, taking it in. Hardwood floors, slightly worn. A coat rack with a single cardigan still hanging on it. A small table with a bowl for keys that still held Thomas's car keys. He'd lived here. Made coffee in the morning, read books in the evening. Played his classical music, mourned his wife and daughter, endured decades of hostility from next door. And he'd chosen kindness anyway. I moved through the first floor slowly, touching things reverently. The living room held comfortable furniture, a worn leather chair positioned near the window, a sofa with Afghans draped over the back, bookshelves overflowing with volumes on music theory, psychology, history, and fiction. I pulled out a book at random, The Art of Teaching Music to Young Minds. Inside the cover, a dedication. To Thomas, the best teacher I ever had. Thank you for believing in me. Jennifer Martinez, 1987. I put it back carefully and continued exploring. The kitchen was dated but clean, dishes still in the drying rack from what must have been Thomas's last meal. A mug with musical notes painted on it, a plate, a single fork. The loneliness of those items hit me like a physical blow. One of everything. No one to share meals with. No one to wash dishes for. On the refrigerator, held by magnets, were newspaper clippings. I moved closer to read them. Articles about former students' successes. A young woman winning a prestigious violin competition. A boy receiving a scholarship to Juilliard. A girl conducting a major orchestra. Each one had a note in Thomas's shaky handwriting. Knew her when she was 8. So proud. He couldn't read music when he started. Look at him now. She changed my life, but I'd like to think I changed hers too. I found myself crying again, overwhelmed by the evidence of a life well lived. This man, this supposedly dangerous man, had touched hundreds of lives. Had shaped futures, nurtured talents, believed in children when maybe no one else did. And my parents had made him out to be a monster. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step creaking softly under my feet. 3 bedrooms.
The master, simply furnished but comfortable.
A guest room with a single bed, perfectly made, clearly unused for years. And a closed door at the end of the hall. My heart pounded as I approached it. This would be it. Rebecca's room. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room took my breath away. It was a shrine, yes, but a living one. Not creepy or morbid, but preserved with love. A violin rested on a stand near the window, its wood glowing in the sunlight. Sheet music was arranged neatly on a music stand of Vivaldi, Bach, Mozart. Posters of famous musicians lined the walls. A desk held notebooks filled with compositions, a young woman's handwriting growing more confident and sophisticated across the pages, and photographs. So many photographs. Rebecca as a child, holding her first tiny violin, gap-toothed smile enormous. Rebecca as a teenager, performing in a recital, serious and focused. Rebecca as a young woman, radiant in a college music program photo, her whole future ahead of her. She looked like Catherine, I realized. The same gentle eyes, the same soft smile. On the dresser sat a framed photo of the 3 of them, Thomas, Catherine, and Rebecca, at what looked like Rebecca's high school graduation. They looked so happy. So completely, ordinarily happy. A family that tragedy had ripped apart. I sat on the bed still covered with its original bedspread, and picked up one of Rebecca's journals. The entries were what you'd expect from a talented 19-year-old. Excitement about college, anxiety about auditions, boys she liked. Friends she missed. Dreams of playing professionally someday. The last entry was dated November 25, 1982, Thanksgiving break. Finally going home. Can't wait to see Mom and Dad. Mom promised to make her famous apple pie, and Dad said he'd play Brahms with me, our favorite duet. It's going to be perfect. She never made it home. I closed the journal carefully, tears dripping onto its cover. This was what my parents had destroyed with their lies. Not just Thomas's reputation, but the memory of his family. The neighborhood had seen him as creepy, dangerous, wrong, never knowing he was a grieving father who'd lost everything and still tried to do good. I spent hours in that room, reading Rebecca's journals, looking through her sheet music, trying to understand the girl she'd been. She was funny. Her entries were full of observations about her teachers and fellow students that made me laugh. She was talented. The complexity of her compositions was remarkable. She was kind. She wrote about volunteering to teach music to underprivileged kids, about wanting to make art accessible to everyone. She would have been an incredible person. And she'd been stolen from the world at 19 by someone's selfish choice to drive drunk. I understood then, in a way I hadn't before, why Thomas had chosen to save me. Why he'd watched me grow up with such attention. I wasn't a replacement for Rebecca no one could be. But maybe I was a reminder that sometimes you can prevent tragedy. That sometimes being vigilant and caring means a child gets to live. As the sun began to set, I heard a knock on the front door. I went downstairs, expecting my parents, preparing for another confrontation. Instead, I found Harold Pemberton on the porch, holding a file box. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "I thought you might want these tonight. Thomas's personal documents." More context for the story. I invited him in, grateful for the company. We sat in Thomas's living room, and Harold opened the box. Thomas was meticulous about documentation, Harold explained. Not because he was paranoid, but because he understood that truth requires evidence. He knew that someday, someone might need to see this. He handed me folders one by one. The police report from August 1986 was stark in its clinical language. Officers responded to a 911 call at 2:47 p.m. Found adult female, age 26, unconscious on living room couch. Empty wine bottle and prescription medication, Valium, prescribed scattered on floor. Infant, 6 months. Found in distress in backyard by neighbor, Thomas Whitmore, age 60, who had heard crying. Infant showing signs of dehydration and heat exposure. Mother transported to Mercy Hospital. Infant examined by paramedics, treated at scene, released to father's care. CPS notified per protocol. Officer's notes added. Neighbor T. Whitmore, age 47.
stated he and his wife heard infant crying for extended period before investigating. Mother appears to have been unconscious for significant time. Investigation ongoing. The medical records confirm the story. My treatment for dehydration and mild heat stroke. My mother's treatment for overdose, whether accidental or intentional, the doctors couldn't determine. Psychiatric evaluation recommended. Follow-up care prescribed. And then the CPS reports. 3 visits to our home over the following months. Interviews with my parents, with the Whitmores, with neighbors. Recommendations for my mother to continue therapy and medication management. Notes that I was thriving, well cared for, that the incident appeared to be isolated. The case was closed after 6 months with the family remaining intact but on a monitoring list. Your parents passed all the checks, Harold explained. They were cooperative, remorseful, they followed every recommendation. By all accounts, they became good parents to you. Except for the part where they built their entire lives around a lie, I said bitterly. Except for that, Harold agreed. Thomas actually advocated for them during the investigation. Did you know that? He told CPS that your mother was clearly ill, that she needed help not punishment, that everyone deserved a second chance. I stared at him. He defended them? He did. Catherine did too. They never wanted you taken away from your parents. They just wanted you safe. More folders revealed the evolution of my parents' narrative. Neighborhood meeting minutes from late 1986, where someone had raised concerns about the elderly couple who de-entered the Cooper home without permission. Thomas and Catherine had tried to explain, but the damage was done, the seed of doubt planted. A letter from my mother to the Homeowners Association in 1987, complaining about the Whitmores, watching our daughter through the fence, and requesting that something be done about their intrusive behavior. Thomas's response, measured and calm, explaining that their backyard was visible from his property, that he and his wife meant no harm, that they were simply living their lives. The fence permit application from 1988. The lawsuits, all 3 of them, with court transcripts showing my parents' increasingly desperate attempts to, what? Force the Whitmores to move, legally erase them from existence? And through it all, Thomas's careful documentation. Photos of his property showing there was nothing illegal or dangerous. Witness statements from other neighbors about his character. Letters from former students testifying to his kindness. He'd been preparing for this moment. For the time when someone would finally ask for the truth. Why didn't he ever fight back publicly? I asked Harold. Why not just tell everyone what really happened? Harold sighed. He did try once. About 5 years after the incident. He wrote a letter to the neighborhood newsletter, trying to explain his side. He pulled out a yellowed copy. I read Thomas's words. Dear neighbors, there have been many rumors and concerns raised about my wife and myself over the years. I want to address them directly and honestly. In 1986, we performed an act of emergency intervention when we found an infant in distress. The child's parent was experiencing a medical crisis. We called 911 and provided care until professionals arrived. This is not sinister or improper. It is what any good neighbor would do. Since then, we have been characterized as intrusive, dangerous, and unwelcome in this community. This characterization is hurtful and false. We are simply 2 people trying to live quietly in our home, grieving the loss of our daughter, tending our garden, and wishing harm to no one. I ask for understanding and the opportunity to be seen as we are, imperfect but well-meaning people who acted out of concern for a child's welfare. Respectfully, Thomas Whitmore. What happened after he published this? I asked. Your mother wrote a rebuttal, Harold said quietly. She claimed he was manipulating facts, making himself seem like a hero when he'd really violated their privacy and trust. She questioned his motives, suggested he had an unhealthy interest in you. It got ugly. He showed me my mother's response, and I felt sick reading it. She twisted everything, made Thomas's attempt at truth-telling sound like the ramblings of someone unstable. After that, he stopped trying. Harold continued. He decided that living with quiet dignity was better than engaging in a public battle he couldn't win. I spent that night in Thomas's house. I'd intended to drive back to Seattle, but as darkness fell, I realized I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay in this space, to understand the man who'd lived here, to honor his memory by truly seeing him.
I made tea in his kitchen using his mug with the musical notes. I sat in his leather chair and opened one of his books, a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. Passages were underlined, notes written in the margins in that familiar shaky hand. One note, next to a passage about enduring hardship with grace.
Catherine would have loved this.
She was always stronger than me.
Another near thoughts on forgiveness. Anger is a burden I can't afford to carry.
They don't know what they do to themselves. And one more dated just months before his death. If Elle reads this someday, I hope she understands. Not everyone who saves you wears a cape. Sometimes they're just the quiet neighbor you never noticed.
Elmy, Lillian, he'd known somehow that I'd end up here, that I'd find these breadcrumbs he'd left.
I fell asleep in his chair and dreamed of roses and violins and a little girl I'd never meet. Rebecca came to me in the dream, looking just like her photos, smiling and whole. "Thank you for being here," she said.
Dad was so lonely after Mom died, and after I died.
But he held on. He held on because of you. Because of me? I asked in the dream. But I never even spoke to him. You were the reason he saved, Rebecca said. Every time he looked at you through that fence, he saw a second chance. A life that continued because someone paid attention. He couldn't save me, but he saved you. That mattered to him. More than you'll ever know. When I woke, the sun was streaming through the windows and I was crying again. That morning, I explored the attic Harold had mentioned in Thomas's letter. The stairs were steep, the space under the eaves crowded with boxes, but everything was neatly labeled. Catherine's clothes, Rebecca's childhood, teaching materials, music collection. I opened the box labeled Photos Family and found myself looking at decades of memories. Thomas and Catherine on their wedding day, young and radiant. Rebecca as a baby, a toddler, a growing girl.
Family vacations, holidays, ordinary moments made extraordinary by the love evident in every image.
And then, in a box labeled After, photos that broke my heart all over again. Thomas alone at Catherine's grave. Thomas sitting on his porch, staring into the distance. Thomas in his garden, surrounded by roses, looking ancient and weathered and unutterably sad. But there were also photos that surprised me. Thomas at a former student's wedding, smiling genuinely. Thomas at a retirement party, surrounded by colleagues, clearly respected and loved. Thomas volunteering at a youth music program, helping a young boy hold a violin correctly. He'd had a life outside the nightmare my parents created. He'd had meaning, purpose, connection. They'd tried to take that from him, but they'd failed. I heard voices outside, angry voices. I went to the attic window and looked down. My parents were in their backyard, arguing. Their voices carried clearly in the morning air. "We have to tell her the truth," my father was saying. "She deserves to know why we..." "No." My mother cut him off. "If we admit it now, it makes everything we've done look. It makes us look exactly like what we are," my father said, his voice breaking. People who couldn't face their own shame, so they destroyed an innocent man's life instead. He wasn't innocent. He came into our house. He saved our daughter's life, Margaret. He and Catherine saved Lily, and we've spent 40 years punishing them for it. There was a long silence. Then I heard my mother's sobs, harsh and desperate. "I know," she cried. "God help me, I know. I've known all along. But I couldn't face it." Every time I thought about apologizing, about admitting the truth, I'd remember everyone knowing, everyone judging. I'd rather they thought he was the problem than know I was. And look what it cost, my father said quietly. That man died alone. His wife died thinking the whole neighborhood hated her. And our daughter looks at us now like we're strangers. Like we're the monsters in the story. Because we are, my mother whispered. Aren't we? We are. I left the attic and went downstairs, out the front door, around to where I could see my parents. They looked up, startled, caught in their private moment of truth. "You're right," I said, my voice carrying across both yards. "You are the monsters in this story. But you don't have to stay that way." My mother wiped her eyes. "Lily, we're so sorry. We're so sorry. I know you are. I heard you."
But sorry isn't enough. Sorry doesn't bring Thomas back.
Sorry doesn't give him back the 40 years you took from him. What do you want from us? My father asked, not defensively, but genuinely. Tell us, we'll do anything.
I thought about Thomas's words in his letter. Maybe, just maybe, forgive your parents. I thought about Rebecca's dream words. He held on because of you. I thought about all the years of lies and the fence that divided truth from fiction.
I want you to help me tear down the fence, I said. Both my parents stared at me. I want you to help me dismantle the wall you built.
Every board, every post.
I want you to physically undo what you did. Okay, my father said immediately. Yes. When? Today. Now. And while we work, you're going to tell me everything. Every detail of what really happened. No more lies, no more justifications.
The whole truth.
My mother looked terrified, but she nodded.
Okay. Yes, you deserve that. And then, I continued, you're going to help me plan something.
A memorial for Thomas. A proper one.
We're going to invite the neighborhood, his former students, anyone who knew him.
And you're going to stand up in front of everyone and tell them the truth. You're going to publicly acknowledge what he and Catherine did for me. And you're going to apologize for 40 years of slander. My mother's face went pale. Lily, I don't know if I can. You can, I said firmly. Because that's what it takes to stop being the monster.
That's what accountability looks like. That's the price of trying to earn forgiveness. My father went to get tools, a crowbar, a hammer, work gloves.
My mother and I stood on opposite sides of the fence, not speaking, just looking at each other through the gaps in the wood. I was sick, she finally said. After you were born.
It was more than postpartum depression, though that's what they called it.
I was disappearing, losing myself.
The pills were supposed to help, but they just made everything foggy. Why didn't you get help? I asked. I was trying to... The wine... I know it was stupid, mixing it with the pills. I just wanted to feel normal for a minute. Just a minute of not feeling like I was drowning. And then I was falling asleep and I thought I'd just close my eyes for a second, ... She pressed her hands against the fence, her fingers coming through the gaps.
When I woke up in the hospital, they told me what happened. That you'd been outside, crying, overheated. That the neighbors had found you.
And I felt like I died. Like I should have died. How do you live with yourself after that?
How do you look at your baby and know you almost killed her through negligence? You get help, I said quietly. You admit you need it, you accept support, you do better. I did do better, she insisted. I went to therapy. I stayed on my medication. I never took another drink. I became a good mother to you, Lily. I did. Except you couldn't let Thomas and Catherine be the heroes, I said. You couldn't let them be the good people who saved me. Because that would mean acknowledging what you'd done.
So you made them into villains instead. My father returned with the tools, and we began the work of dismantling the fence.
It was harder than I'd expected. 10-foot boards, heavy and weathered, nails rusted into place.
We worked in silence at first, the physical labor demanding all our attention.
But gradually, as we removed board after board, my parents began to talk. They told me about the CPS investigation, how terrifying it had been, how they'd lived in constant fear of losing me for those 6 months. They told me about the neighbors' whispers, the judgment, the way people had looked at them differently. They told me how Catherine had tried to reach out afterward, bringing over a casserole and a card that said, "No judgment.
We've all struggled. We're here if you need anything." And they told me how they couldn't accept that kindness, couldn't face that grace, because it required them to face their own failure.
It was easier to be angry, my father admitted. Easier to focus on them as a threat than to deal with what had really happened. And the more time passed, the more locked into the story we became, my mother added. After the first lawsuit, after the fence went up, we couldn't back down.
We couldn't admit we'd been wrong. It would make us look ... like liars, I finished.
Like people who'd spent years tormenting innocent people.
Yes,
she whispered. By midday, half the fence was down. We could see between the two properties now, the yards visible to each other for the first time in decades.
It was disorienting, like two different worlds suddenly colliding. My mother sat down on the grass, exhausted.
I used to watch her, you know? Catherine. She'd be in her garden, and I'd see her from the kitchen window. She looked so peaceful. And I'd hate her for it. For being okay when I wasn't.
She wasn't okay, I said gently. She'd lost her daughter.
She was carrying grief you can't imagine. I know that now, my mother said. But then, I couldn't see past my own pain. And Thomas, every time I saw him, I'd remember his face when the paramedics took me away. The look he gave me.
Not judgment, exactly. Just ... sadness, like he pitied me. Maybe he did, I said.
Maybe he understood what it meant to be human and fallible and broken. My father pulled out another board, and suddenly there was a clear sight line from one porch to the other. He stood there, looking at Thomas's empty house. I wish I could apologize, he said. I wish I could tell him we were wrong, that we're sorry, that we understand now what we did to him. You can't, I said. But you can honor his memory by telling the truth.
By making sure everyone knows who he really was.
By sunset, the fence was completely down. We stood surrounded by piles of wood, the boundary between properties erased. The rose bushes that had been pressed against the fence on Thomas's side now spilled freely into both yards, their scent overwhelming in the evening air. It was beautiful and sad and overwhelming all at once. My mother walked into Thomas's yard, formerly Forbidden's territory, and knelt beside the roses. She touched them gently, tears streaming down her face.
I'm sorry,
she whispered.
I'm so sorry. My father joined her, and then I did too. The three of us kneeling in Thomas's garden, surrounded by the flowers he'd tended for 40 years.
That night, we sat on Thomas's porch, all three of us, and planned the memorial. We'd hold it in 2 weeks, enough time to reach out to people. My parents would write a letter to the neighborhood, explaining everything, inviting people to come hear the truth. Harold had a list of Thomas's former students. We'd contact as many as we could find.
We'd display photos of Thomas, Catherine, and Rebecca. We'd tell their real story. And my parents would stand up and confess, publicly, completely. It's going to destroy our reputation, my mother said quietly. Yes, I agreed.
It will. But maybe that's what needs to happen. Maybe you need to lose the false reputation to have a chance at building a true one. My father reached over and took my mother's hand. We'll do it. Whatever it takes. The 2 weeks that followed were intense. I stayed in Thomas's house, getting it ready.
Cleaning, organizing, preparing to open it to visitors.
I spent hours in Rebecca's room, absorbing her presence, understanding the girl she'd been. I contacted Harold for the list of former students, and together we called dozens of people.
The responses were overwhelming. Mr. Whitmore? Oh my God, I loved him.
He's the reason I became a professional musician. Thomas was like a second father to me. When my parents couldn't afford lessons, he taught me for free. I was so shy, couldn't speak in front of people. He helped me find my voice through music. I owe him everything. Story after story of lives touched, talents nurtured, kindness given freely. And not one person said anything negative. Not one suggested he was dangerous or creepy or wrong. Because he wasn't. He was just a good man who'd been targeted by 2 people's shame.
My parents worked too, in their own way.
They wrote letters to the neighborhood association, to people who'd known the story, to anyone who'd participated in the shunning of Thomas. They told the truth. All of it. Some people were angry. Some accused them of lying now, of trying to rewrite history. Some wanted nothing to do with them. But others, more than I expected, responded with a kind of stunned sympathy. I always wondered, one neighbor wrote back. I never understood what Thomas had supposedly done. Now it makes sense. Thank you for finally being honest. Another wrote. This must have taken incredible courage. I hope you find peace. The day of the memorial arrived. A Saturday in April, warm and bright. We held it in Thomas's backyard, in the garden he'd tended for decades. We'd set up chairs, arranged tables with photos and documents, created a space for people to gather and remember. Over 100 people came. Former students, now adults with children of their own. Colleagues from Thomas's teaching years. A few neighbors who'd always suspected the truth.
Harold, of course. And some people I didn't know, distant relatives apparently, who'd lost touch over the years, but came when they heard there would finally be a proper memorial. I set up a music stand with Rebecca's violin on it, surrounded by her favorite sheet music. It became an impromptu memorial for both father and daughter, the family that had been destroyed by tragedy and then tormented by injustice. At 2:00, I stood up to speak. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice shaking but steady. "Most of you are here because Thomas Whitmore touched your life in some way. Some of you knew him as a teacher, a mentor, a friend. Some of you are discovering today who he really was." I took a breath, looking out at the crowd. "I'm Lillian Cooper. I lived next door to Thomas for 28 years. And until 2 weeks ago I believed he was a dangerous man. Because that's what I was told. That's what I was taught. That's the lie my parents built a fence to protect." I gestured to my parents, standing off to the side, my mother crying silently, my father's face etched with shame and regret. But the truth is different. The truth is that Thomas and his wife Catherine saved my life when I was 6 months old. And instead of being grateful, instead of honoring that sacrifice, my parents spent 40 years punishing them for it. The crowd was silent, attentive. Some people were nodding. They'd read my parents' letters. "Thomas left me his house," I continued. "And in it, he left the evidence of who he really was. A teacher who changed hundreds of lives. A father who grieved his daughter but still found ways to bring joy to other children. A husband who honored his wife's memory. A man who chose kindness even when cruelty was directed at him." I pulled out some of the photos, held them up. "This is Catherine, tending the roses you're sitting among. This is Rebecca, Thomas's daughter, taken from him at 19. This is Thomas, surrounded by students he taught, lives he touched, futures he shaped." Then I invited others to share their memories. One by one, former students came forward with stories. "Mr. Whitmore bought me my first violin," a woman in her 40s said. "My family couldn't afford it. He said it was a loaner. But years later I found the receipt he'd bought it new. Told me I could return it when I was done, knowing I'd never give it up. He stayed after school every day for a month to help me prepare for an audition," a man recalled. "Never charged extra, never complained. Just said, 'You have something special. Let's make sure they hear it.' When my mom died, he came to the funeral," another shared. "He barely knew our family, but he came. He sat with me afterward and we didn't talk about music or school. We just talked about loss, about grief, about how to keep going. He understood. Story after story, each one revealing another facet of Thomas's character, another life touched, another moment of grace." Finally, it was my parents' turn. They stood together, holding hands, facing a crowd of people who now knew what they'd done. "My name is Margaret Cooper," my mother began, her voice trembling. "And I need to confess something that's been destroying my soul for 40 years. She told the whole story. The depression, the pills, the wine, the moment she left me outside and lost consciousness. Thomas and Catherine's intervention, the police, CPS, the shame that followed. I couldn't live with what I'd done," she said. "I couldn't face the people who'd seen me at my worst, who knew what I'd almost done to my daughter. So I made them into villains. I created a narrative where they were the threat, where I was the victim, where everything they did was sinister instead of loving." She looked directly at Thomas's photo, displayed prominently at the front. "Thomas Whitmore saved my daughter's life, and I repaid him by making his life hell. I built a fence to keep him out. I sued him 3 times, 3 times. For the crime of existing near me. I poisoned the neighborhood against him. I made sure he spent the last years of his life isolated and alone." Her voice broke. "And I can never apologize to him. I can never tell him I was wrong. I can never thank him for his grace, for his silence, for not fighting back when he had every right to destroy us with the truth." My father spoke next. "I enabled all of this," he said. "I told myself I was protecting my family, but really I was protecting myself from having to admit we were wrong. Every lawsuit, every complaint, every hostile act, I participated in all of it. I convinced myself Thomas was the problem because that was easier than facing our own failures." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "To everyone here who knew Thomas, who loved him, who valued him, we took years from him.
We took years from him.
We took peace from Catherine. We contributed to their isolation and pain. And we did it deliberately, knowing exactly what we were doing, because we were cowards who couldn't face the truth. He looked at me, standing at the front, tears streaming down my face.
Our daughter deserved to know the truth.
She deserved to grow up knowing the man next door was a hero, not a villain. We stole that from her, and we stole Thomas's story from all of you. We're sorry. We're so deeply, eternally sorry. The silence that followed was profound. Then slowly, one person began to clap. Then another. Then another. Not applause from my parents, but acknowledgement. Recognition of the courage it took to stand up and confess. Appreciation for the truth finally told.
One of Thomas's former students, a woman in her 60s, approached my parents.
"Thank you," she said simply, "for finally letting us remember him correctly. For letting the truth be known." Others followed. Not everyone was forgiving. Some people left without speaking to my parents at all, their judgment clear. But enough people chose grace. Enough people recognized that admitting wrong is the first step toward making things right. As the afternoon wore on, people explored Thomas's house. They saw Rebecca's room, gasped at the beauty of it, cried over the life cut short. They saw Thomas's books, his music collection, the evidence of a life lived with intention and care. They saw the photos from the fence coming down, which I displayed as part of the story. And they saw the roses, Catherine's roses, blooming freely now across both properties, no longer confined, no longer imprisoned by a wall of shame. Harold pulled me aside as the event was winding down.
"Thomas would be proud," he said.
"This is exactly what he hoped for. Truth, understanding, the possibility of reconciliation. I still wish he could have seen it," I said. "That he could have heard all these people speak about him, could have known how much he mattered."
"He knew," Harold said firmly. "Maybe not specifically, but he knew. Every student who stayed in touch, every card at Christmas, every invitation to a recital or wedding, he knew he'd made a difference."
That knowledge sustained him. As people began to leave, one woman approached me tentatively.
She was older, probably in her 70s, with kind eyes and silver hair. "You don't know me," she said.
"My name is Susan Chen. I lived 3 houses down from Thomas for 20 years. I recognized the name. She was the one who'd called for the wellness check when Thomas died."
"Thank you for calling," I said.
"When you saw the newspapers ... double quotes. I should have done more," she interrupted, her voice fierce with regret. "I should have checked on him more often, invited him over, made sure he wasn't so alone. I heard the stories about him from your parents, and I didn't quite believe them. But I didn't actively fight against them either. I was polite but distant. Neighborly but not a friend." She pulled out a handkerchief, dabbing at her eyes. "The night before he died, I saw him sitting on his porch. It was late, cold. He was just sitting there, wrapped in a blanket, looking at the stars. I almost went over. Almost said, 'Thomas, come have tea. It's too cold out here.' But I didn't. I went inside and went to bed." "You couldn't have known," I said gently. "But that's the point, isn't it?" she said. "I could have known if I'd tried.
If I'd been brave enough to ignore the gossip and just be a decent human being. So many of us could have. We all failed him by our silence, by our willingness to believe the worst without asking questions." She looked at me intently. "What you did today, forcing the truth out, making people face it, that matters. That's how we prevent this from happening to someone else. We remember. We learn. We do better." As sunset approached, only a few people remained. My parents, Harold, me, and a handful of Thomas' former students who traveled from out of state and wanted to spend more time in the space that had shaped them. We sat in the garden among the roses, sharing memories and wine and the comfortable silence of people who've experienced something profound together. One of the students, a professional violinist named Daniel, suddenly stood up. "Wait here," he said, and went into the house. He emerged minutes later carrying Rebecca's violin. "May I?" he asked me. I nodded, unable to speak. Daniel lifted the violin, tested the strings, made minor adjustments. Then he began to play. The music that filled the garden was heartbreakingly beautiful. Vivaldi's Spring from the Four Seasons, hopeful, bright, full of renewal and possibility. The same piece Rebecca had been practicing in one of her journal entries. The same piece she'd planned to perform at her college recital that would never happen. As Daniel played, the sun set behind Thomas's house, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The light caught the flowers, made them glow like they were lit from within.